So are you familiar with Alexander the Great?
Of course I am.
Okay, well, did you hear that apparently after that he had a secretary named Eumenes?
I am aware of that. I've actually, I did a little bit of some reading on him.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, apparently you showed me that there was a manga made after him, or manga.
Manga, potato.
Basically a Japanese comic book made on the life of Eumenes, the secretary of Alexander. I mean, talk about a subject, but let me tell you, Eumenes, he's a little more than your average secretary that you would see like outside of a desk or something. He's kind of a badass. I mean, just to get a little bit about him, he's considered one of the great successors of Alexander. He led his own troops during the succession after Alexander died, and he made a name for himself. He made a name for himself, and unlike all the other successors of Alexander, he was actually the only one who was a Greek. So, today we want to talk about the life of Eumenes as he was portrayed in the manga, and compared to the actual history as written by Diodorus and Plutarch. Although, to be honest, the manga doesn't go that far into it, does it?
Well, unfortunately, the author kind of stops. Well, spoiler alert here. The author kind of halts to a grind by the point where Philip II of Macedon, Alexander's father, gets assassinated.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't reach the point where Alexander himself gets into that commander role or gets to any of his campaigns, but we're there during the progression of Eumenes himself as from a younger
but
19-year-old kid to secretary of this group that he's a part of now.
Basically, so from my reading of the manga, it basically starts off with him as a kid and his early teenage life all the way up until the point he gets, recruited by Philip II, and he becomes his secretary and plays around in the Macedonian court during the rise of Philip and the rise of Macedon all the way up to the Battle of Cannae and eventually Philip's assassination. And then the manga kind of cuts short. And tell you the truth, I was kind of blue-balled at all that.
Yeah, no, I was really blue-balled too.
Because, most people who have a basic understanding of the history, when you're hearing about Alexander, all this Philip stuff in the beginning is kind of like the run-up to Alexander the Great and what he accomplished.
Right.
And you do see Alexander, a young Alexander in the manga. Anyways, what is the manga called again? Historie.
Like history, but with a fucking accent.
Yeah, didn't it come out in 2011?
2008, actually.
2008.
And one thing about this author in particular too is this is not just a one-shot type of thing where it's just he has this one manga which is history. He generally has short stories and other smaller books that's based on other historic events, but it's just through his artistic field of view. There's one on Archimedes as well, the siege of Syracuse and all that. And kind of the lead up to it, and then even his death, which I thought was really interesting, the way they portrayed it.
Oh, now I'm going to have to read that. Well, I might have to do a review on all those because you're holding out on me.
I mean, obviously, Historie is his. I guess you could say his magnum opus, which it's still incomplete, but yeah, Historie is his more generally popular work. But he does have a few more smaller works that are also history related.
Yeah, well, if you're gonna looking at the Japanese point of view, I have a very rudimentary look into Japanese culture, but Japanese culture is very famous for isekai or a fish out of water story. You're literally dropped into a different world. And Eumenes out of a lot of Hellenic, the Western, ancient Western history from Greece, Rome, and all that. Eumenes is especially adapt to that because the great thing about Eumenes, he's a Greek serving in a Macedonian court. And although, Macedonians are kind of the cousins of the Greeks, they all speak the same language, but the Greeks kind of view the Macedonians as barbarians.
Yeah, it's inferior almost.
And the the Macedonians kind of view the Greeks as, kind of a bit snobby.
Like, Humanity's background is almost as non-Greek. They don't look at him as like a traditional Greek. They almost look at him as like a barbarian, like very much an outsider. The way they treat him. I mean, Aristotle obviously is much the way that Aristotle in the beginning treats him is differently because it's fucking Aristotle, right?
Well, Aristotle again at the same time is an Athenian.
No, that's true. Yeah. But like his disciple is like is traditionally treating him like exclusively like an outsider.
Yeah.
Even like the slave and like the slave dialogue, like they compare him to like the slave and all that as well.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry, I just don't really remember the last. I'm more excited about the ending and the Battle of the Cannae. But it's interesting because, like, Greeks, if you go back to ancient times, you got to look at the past as a different country almost. So the Greeks, if you ask the average Greek where they're from, they're going to name their pole or their polis, their city, their city-state. So, like, if you ask a Spartan where he's from, he's going to say, well, I'm a Spartan. I'm from Sparta. I'm from Laconia. If you ask a Greek or a Athenian where he's from, he's going to say, I'm from Athens. I'm from Attica. I'm Athenian. You know? The Greeks almost view it as they will first say where they're from. Their city is the most important thing to them. Then after that, they'll say what region of Greece they are from. Like, Thebes is all Boeotia. Olympia is like, or Lycia is like, sorry, I can't, I'm a little scatterbrained right now, but an Attican is going to say they're from Athens, Argoian is from Argos, Laconia, they're obviously Spartan, like, and then after that, if you're going to ask them, like, well, what region or like what country or like what land are you a part of, they're going to say, oh, I'm a Hellene or I'm a Greek. They call themselves the Hellenes, by the way.
The way I'd compare it is like, it's like if you're from America and you're living in a state, I'd say, so like say you're from New York City, you have people from like the Bronx, you have people from, Syracuse, like those type of like areas. They're different. You got Brooklyn, all that, like Flatbush, all that. Or from like Texas, you have like Houston, Dallas, Austin, El Paso. It's all the same. It's all the same people, all the same type of people, and all in the same area.
Yeah.
But they identify with that city instead of like the entire state as a whole,
or the entire country,
unless it's like, it's like another country.
It's like the cities is what you're most loyal to.
Right.
Then the state, which is like your region of Greece, whether it be Thessaly, Attica, Laconia, or the Peloponnese as a whole, and then. Before the very last thing you're going to say you are before you leave that, like say you're outside the United States, is you're American. Yeah, that's the last thing you're going to say, because the only thing all these cities in Macedonia have in common is literally they speak the same language. Because you got tyrants, you got different forms of government. You got some tyrants and others. You got like the beginnings of democracies and others. You got
despots.
Yeah, despots. You got all different types of governments, and even like different ways they look at the Greek religion the entire way. So everyone's a bit different and very prejudiced against each other. Would you say?
Well, yeah, which is hilarious when you read it from like a reader's point of view.
Yeah. But it kind of fits with the whole Japanese mold. It kind of fits with the whole fucking Japanese mold. So, do you want to just go over how the manga goes over Unanity's story?
I feel like we can just compare and contrast. We can do that with the manga and then his real life counterpart. But I do want to go over some parts of the manga as well.
All right, that's fair. Well, do you want to start from the beginning?
Well, so obviously you read it recently. I haven't read this manga. I haven't touched this manga in about a year. Because that was the last chapter that came out was a year ago. So for me, obviously, I've been waiting patiently for a new chapter to drop. But considering how it's looking, I don't know if we're ever gonna get it. But so from what I remember mostly just like the intro part, and then obviously just like a bits of like the sieging, and then like obviously Eumenides with his compatriots, like with Alexander and all of them. But there is a lot of great things about the manga that I do remember that just stuck with me. It's just a great manga in general, and I feel like it should be talked about more.
Absolutely. I mean, the manga, just looking at it, if you're going to take just where it is in history, it's basically Philip's already kind of risen, and it's more of his rise. He's rising to be the big hegemon of Greece, the big man on the block. Because for years, it's been like Sparta, then Athens. Thebes got 10 years into it, and then Thessaly actually took a stab at being hegemon a few times. But we're at the point where, like, you know, Athens is starting to come down, and Philip of Macedon II is starting to really come up. And that's about the time when Eumenes in the manga kind of picks up. Well, at first, like when he's traveling across Turkey or
you say Asia Minor, yeah.
Yeah, Asia Minor, and he's looking across and he runs into Aristotle of all people. Now,
which I gotta say, I love Aristotle in this book. I love his portrayal of it. I mean, obviously, considering it's a historical manga, it's already kind of rare on its own. But when you see like a person that you read about in real life, and then you see him getting portrayed in such a way, it's just a really good feeling just to read about it, or just to like see how the character interacts with like actual other historical figures.
Yeah, and like to be fair, like this is so early in Eumenes' life, and there's so little written about his early life. We'll certainly go over it. I mean, honestly, there's more to talk about what's going on during the beginning of his life than actually his real life, because we don't have that much. Our primary sources are Diodorus of Sicily and Plutarch. And literally, Plutarch, just reading through it, he literally has only one paragraph on the beginnings of his life. So there's actually a lot of room for the author to take a lot of liberties with like his story and give him like a good fleshed out character. And you know what? Like, I don't agree with every direction he took, but he took a lot of good directions with that, right?
I'd say for the most part, for his background and what Eumenes like represented like later on, I'd say the steps he took in his origin story really makes a lot of logical sense in how he ends up towards the middle portion and even towards the end of the manga so far. So it's like when you read his origin story, or you know, read how he interacted early on, it just makes sense. It makes sense, and that's what I like about it a lot. It makes sense, and a lot of the scenarios that have, you know, happened in the origin part of his story, I could actually see it happening.
Yeah. Well, I like it how, the author portrays him as like kind of a clever, dashing figure who uses his wits to get himself out of like some pretty sticky situations.
Right, yeah.
I mean, there's plenty of examples in the manga, but like, you know, like just reading Plutarch and his later campaigns when he was actually a general in one of Alexander's successors fighting the other Diadoche, like a lot of the times he's worried about, like, he's a fish out of water. He is leading Macedonians who already have, like, you know, they don't want to be led by a Greek. They're never going to accept him as, like, their king. He has to earn the respect, either through trickery or through his charisma of speech. And it really comes out with that in the manga. Like, he has some great dialogue that, like, yeah, this is a guy I could follow. I'd want to follow. And, like, Plutarch constantly, like, praises him for, like, you know, his charisma alone winning over followers who will follow him, as opposed to, like, you know, someone from your own country, like Antigonus or something. And I think that really comes through. Also, other things with the manga, like, apparently he's kind of quite of an inventor.
Yeah, that's what really surprised me about the manga in Historie. It's like, you see a lot of times, well, specific situations mostly, but you see a lot of times Eumenes or somebody else in, like, that's alongside of him, you see him, like, put together things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, in the first chapter, you have the little rowboat we have the oars. He had the branches with like, and he was missing, like, a piece, like this little, like, snake piece. And what he ends up doing is that when he puts it together, he makes it like a paddle. So like we can paddle from one
He
side.
makes himself a little paddle boat to escape the Persian cavalry coming up.
Yeah, and
cross the Dardanelles.
And my favorite part about it is like fucking Aristotle is just like praising him the entire time. He's like, "You're genius!" Like, this is exactly what I was gonna do. Blah blah blah. And then his disciple's like, "Man, what the fuck?"
Yes, his disciple, like your average Greek, is like, "I don't understand. This boat is moving." Okay, and Eumenes is like just cranking out like a whole new invention, basically turning a rowboat into a paddle boat, so they can paddle across the Dardanelles. Because we'll just give you the context. They're trying to get off Asia Minor because the Persians are coming and they're coming to arrest Aristotle. Now, in real life, I don't think Aristotle went to Asia Minor, basically the west end of Turkey, right there. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that happened. I kind of have my doubts. Like, why would he? It was all under Persian control at the time. Maybe some Athenian control, because the Athenian was trying to... Athens was trying to create its second empire.
Yeah, this was also on right by the ruins of Troy as well. So.
Yeah, that's true. And, like, the Greeks actually still worship Troy. Like, they went over there. That was kind of like their Jerusalem.
It was almost like they did pilgrimages there, too.
Yeah. But Eumenes, like, they're trying to escape, and they're trying to find a way to get this rowboat moving, and they make 2 circles of reeds, put those circles on like an axle, and then he had this snake bit to use it as a pedal to turn the axle and basically turn a rowboat into like a little paddle boat, which I thought was kind of inventive and cool. Like, it's thinking outside the box. And if you read Eumenes, like, he thinks of clever contraptions like this, especially in his campaigns.
Yeah.
Like, actually a lot of the successors do. They come up with like contraptions that like get them out of like hairy situations. Just for example, so later in his campaigns, when Eumenes is fighting Antigonus, and Antigonus has like 3 times the army that he does. Well, Eumenes, it's wintertime. Everyone's starting to go home. It's not a campaigning season. Eumenes, he can't pay his whole army, so he disperses most of it, and he holds up in the city with like 1,000 men. But he has to keep the men trained, so he comes up with like exercising regiments for the men. But he also has cavalry there, and Eumenes is strong cavalry. Well, the horses can't just sit in a stall all winter. They're going to get fat, and they're going to get slow. So what he does is he creates like the equivalent of an ancient treadmill, so the horses can exercise. That way, when it's time and Antigonus comes back to like besiege him, he's ready to go. And it's like, wow. And like Plutarch I can't express to you how much Plutarch like praises him.
No, Plutarch can't be dick writing Eumenes. I can't even lie. But like, I feel like the praise is very well deserved, especially for someone of Eumenes' like status at that time. It's almost like unheard of.
Well, yeah.
Well, not unheard of, but like it's a rare thing to see.
Well, yeah. Well, considering of the group of guys he was hanging around with, like through Alexander's campaign, like even during Alexander's campaign, like how they think of like solutions, like the famous siege of Tyre, like they build giant siege towers and they put them on top of ships, so that way they could roll up to the island of Tyre to besiege the walls on a tower on a ship 2,000 years ago. Like, that is, like, wow, that is mental. Like, I cannot express, like, how innovative that is, especially at the time,
Right.
Like, before computers and stuff like that, or, like, concrete.
Or even just, like, basic math equations and all that.
Yeah, well, I was talking about there with Aristotle. So, basically, he gets across the strait, right? And I remember he's trying to go back to his hometown of Cardia.
Yeah. Also, I like this part as well. When Aristotle's talking, because Aristotle brings up like the world, like I think he brought out like a globe or something. Yeah, he brought out like a globe, and he was showing like like the areas, like and he was like, I read about this from him or Herodotus. And Aristotle's like, Herodotus, you read him too? He's kind of like going back and forth with him about like Herodotus, the first considered historian, and then it's like, this is Italy, I read about this, blah blah blah, and then I love like when they're going through that, and then Eumenes like coins the name of the globe as Earth, and Aristotle's like, I like that. Let me just take that. I mean, obviously, I don't think Eumenes came up with the term in real life, but just like I just like those little like subtle things that they put in that manga.
I think they refer to it as Gaia, like after the Roman goddess Gaia, which is literally Earth.
Yeah.
You know? Zeus's grandmother, I believe. Yeah, something like that. But it's just really interesting because, like, you know, you got two giant academics, and like the audience of the manga is like portrayed through the Greek guy sitting. What was it?
His disciple, right?
Yeah, his disciple. And Aristotle's disciple just sitting there like, what are these two talking about? And then, you know, the audience being is where, you know, hindsight 2,000 years ago, we're like, oh, they're talking about the world. And like, it's kind of cool because like the ancients, they, it's only recently that they even figured out that the world was round. The Greeks did. They did a whole interesting thing where some guy stuck a stick in like northern Macedon, and recorded what time the shadow came. And at the same time, he had another group down in Egypt stick a stick in the sand, and at the same time they recorded what position the shadow is. And by doing the math of that, they found the distance, like how the world is a globe. And they actually, within like 200 miles, estimated how round it was, how big the Earth was. And it's actually quite interesting.
It's quite impressive, honestly.
Yeah. So he makes it across the shore in this contraption with Aristotle and his disciple. They're running away from the Persians. And Eumenes, we don't know. We know he's Eumenes, but like we don't really know his character, like his childhood. And he's going back to his city of Cardia. Yeah. Which there's a problem there. You can't just walk in.
There's a big ass army right outside his gates.
Yes, big army.
Yep, and then with them giant ass spears too.
The Sarissas.
The Sarissas, yep.
Well, we know, but like just so you know, the Macedonian army is marching in circles around Cardia, and you know, Eumenes has left Aristotle at the time, and he's trying to get back into Cardia. We don't know why, but you know. So he finds an old woman, and he tries telling her, like, hey, you know, I'm trying to get in here. And the old woman's like, me too. And he's like, oh, he creates a clever ploy where, like, hey, you know, let's pretend I'm your servant, and, you know, we're trying to mourn your dead husband.
As well, this old woman, it's not just like some regular old woman, it's actually a wealthy old woman. Mm-hmm. So she's kind of like, I guess you could say like a noble of the city, you'd say.
And him dressing like a barbarian.
Or looking like a barbarian as well.
Looking like a barbarian. Well, they come up with a clever plan where he's going to pretend to be his servant, and they're going to, you know, try to get in. Well, first, they march, they walk up to the city. The Macedonians don't even pay them no mind. They're just staying in their perfect formation, marching around the city. And Eumenes points out, they don't look like they're about to attack or even besiege the city. This looks more like a presentation. I think we're good to walk right through. So that's what him and the women do. But the city is afraid. They're in siege mode. They're afraid that
it's justified why they are scared.
Oh, absolutely. Well, yeah, if you see like I think at the time 20,000 Macedonians walking around with 20-foot sarissas and the companion cavalry walking around, yeah, I'm not walking outside either. So they get to the gate and they ask the guard for entry, and the guard's like, are you crazy? Do you see what's out there? I'm not letting you guys in. And it's funny. So Eumenes is, looks at the woman and is like, hey, just go along with what I say. And he starts proclaiming, can you believe this? Oh, woe is me. Cardia will not let me in, and all I want to do is gather up my master urns. I'm here with my master's widow, and all we've come here to do is just to honor him by spreading his ashes over his favorite plantation. Why won't they let me into Cardia? And he yells this.
He just repeats this, too. He repeats it like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah. And, at first it's like, why is this guy doing it?
Wait. Before that, though. We also get an introduction to Philip as well. This is his very first appearance in this manga.
Well, no one knows it's Philip. You just see like 3 guys come up, and one guy with an eye patch come up and be like, "Hey, I'm trying to get into the city too. You have any ideas?" And Eumenes is like, "I have something. Just wait here."
I also like about this part is like, Philip asks like one of the guards if I look suspicious with a fucking eye patch on.
Do I look very conspicuous?
And then he asks his guys, and the guy's like, yes.
But, so, Eumenes, I actually like this part a lot. because Eumenes is going out and he's yelling how the city won't let him in to honor his master. He's pretending to be a slave, trying to put on this facade, but he's yelling this out so everyone would hear. He's basically trying to shame the city. Now, Hellenic culture at the time, this is like right on the cusp of the Hellenic age, and a lot of it is just honor. Like the Hellenes, the Greeks, a lot of their culture is honor based. I know it's a very alien concept today, but like your honor says a lot about you, and it says a lot that you're not even willing to open up the city to let somebody honor their master because you're too afraid because of the possibility that these Macedonians will come up. But Eumenes challenges their pride by walking amongst the Macedonians. He's going in between the lances.
He starts repeating what he was
shaming
saying.
The city.
Yeah.
And finally, the door just happens to crack open a little bit, and you hear the guards like, get in here, real quick. Come on, hurry up. Just shut up, all right? We get it. And he gets in the city with the old lady and Philip. Well, we don't know he's Philip yet.
Yeah.
And this mysterious one-eyed patched man. And they get inside the city. And, first, we don't know he's Philip, but he talks with Philip, and Philip's like, hey, that's really clever. I really like your style. And Eumenes is like, thanks. And he's like, hey, come talk to me later.
Eumenes is like, what the fuck? He's like,
and then Eumenes enters the city. And that's basically that's the first book, basically, right?
Well, is that part, but then also they have a bit of his origin story. That's like the first volume of it.
Yeah, well, this is the introduction to his origin story.
Introduction, yeah.
And then he starts, he finds his old house. It's in ruins. And then we finally get to the real start of the story, because this is like the introduction part. And it takes him back to when he was like 5 years old.
Probably
yeah.
Well, I'd say more like maybe like 8 or 9, honestly.
8 or 9. Basically, we get the true start of the story of Eumenes.
Yeah.
And I think we could talk about that next. So, back on the story of Eumenes, and comparing him to his manga counterpart in Historia. So, I think we're on volume 2.
Well, volume 1, we did leave out some parts of volume 1 where it was taken back to his origin story, where he was a much younger child, and we've come to find out that his background was that of a wealthy family, a family that's well off. They had multiple slaves,
So kind of like a noble family.
A noble family, yes.
All right. Well.
Continue.
Okay. Well, I was just gonna say. So, Eumenes is in the manga and actually in real life. He's a noble in a small town on the Dardanelles Strait where the Gallipoli campaigns happened in World War One. Anyways, Cappadocia. He's in this town called Cappadocia as a young noble.
What's it, Carpadia?
Carpadia?
Carpadia.
Yeah, Eumenes of Carpadia. Yeah, that's right. It's Carpadia. I'm sorry, I got confused. So Carpadia, it used to be a Athenian colony, but around this time, I guess it's like semi-autonomous. The Athenians are trying to extend their reach, rebuilding their old empire. But I guess around this time in the manga, Carpadia has kind of gone autonomous. They're kind of ruling themselves right there, but they're always in constant threat of the Thracians just north of them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So the story goes back in time to explain Eumenes as like a 9-10-year-old child living as a nobleman's son in Carpatia, or Cardia, sorry. You want to go on?
Yeah, and well, we come to find out that since Eumenes is part of this family, he is accompanied by this other slave, which I cannot say his name off the top of my head, but yeah, he has like the slave guy that follows him around, does like chores for the family and all that sort of thing. He's like a housekeeper almost. And you have like this older brother of Eumenes that is, he's set to inherit the family fortune, but compared to Eumenes himself, he's basically incompetent. He's incompetent, doesn't get good grades at school, he's that sort of character,
Yeah.
And well, Eumenes' father kind of like sat down with him and talked to him saying, you have a special talent that not many people have, but he can't really go into detail on what this talent is specifically. So it kind of leaves Eumenes a bit confused on what his father means.
Well, compared to his brother, Eumenes is actually indoors studying the classics. So just not to skip too much ahead, but Eumenes is the second son of a Greek noble. Now, when we say noble, we're not talking, well, it kind of compares to like nobility like during the Middle Ages. And that's kind of like a lot what these cities are. Like you have, you kind of have the wealthier, like in charge people, and then you got poorer people. Like every city has its nobility or important men, to say the least. So since Eumenes' family is better off, he has time for proper education and teaches himself to read. And one thing he likes to do is go down to his local scroll store. So in the manga, there's a stand that sells scrolls, which scrolls at the time are the equivalents to books to now.
Right,
so,
they are basically books.
Yeah, and actually during research about this is actually how people got their scrolls or books. Like at least the learned men who actually could read in the cities would actually go to these scroll stores who had copies of works that like patrons do, and there would be poetry, copies of the Iliad, or like histories from Herodotus. And it's funny because Eumenes is heading over there to get a certain volume of a certain book. Very specifically, he's really into a book called Xenophon the Anabasis. And he keeps going up to the stand every day to ask the store clerk, hey, did Xenophon come up with this new volume? And to be quite honest, it kind of reminds me of a kid back in the 90s looking for, like, the next volume of, like, Superman or Batman. Like, it really reminds me of that.
It's really funny.
Except it's like, he's asking for an ancient history book. And if you ever read Thucydides' the Anabasis, it is broken up into novels, even like translations. They'll tell you like book 1 or book 2. Well, those books are like the actual scrolls or the amount of writing he could fit on the scrolls, like the actual chapters. Well, today we call them chapters, but back then those were the whole books. Yeah, so you would pay for like the next volume of scrolls, like, hey, I want to hear what happened next in the Anabasis. Which itself is a whole story. And the Anabasis, like at this time, like not just for Eumenes, even though he's really interested, it's actually a very popular book because a certain group of people, I don't know, like Philip II, are actually very interested to use and learn what the Persian Empire's like. You know that?
No, not at all. But I mean, I knew the book was popular even at that time. But just like, I kind of find it an interesting parallels where it's like, even like 2,000 years ago, you even have like people waiting almost exclusively just for this volume of this fucking written like autobiography or like written events of this thing that happened, just waiting for the scroll to come by. And then the store clerk in the manga is like, oh, it's super popular, it's not getting written down fast enough. We have to wait to come by. Maybe come by next week. And then Eumenes being, like kind of like wealthy on the wealthier side, he's like, just send it to my house at this point. Like, I'm not gonna come by to the store every other week just to fucking not find the scroll here. Just send it to my house when it comes by.
Oh my god! Like you can see the parallels, like waiting for your favorite game or the next volume of manga, or just even waiting for like the next episode of Game of Thrones to come out. Just like, come on, where is it? Except, like back in the day, like in the 90s or something, you're going down to the comic book store, going down to GameStop to like wait for your next favorite game to come out. And honestly, it kind of brings a lot of parallels to like the modern world. Like today, like when we're waiting for like, the next episode or the next book or in the series, it's kind of funny. Like, it's similar, but it's not.
It isn't because, like, obviously you don't got, like, the author themselves, like, giving updates.
Oh, absolutely. And
you don't even know if the next volume's going to come by.
And don't forget, each copy is handwritten.
On papyrus
so you're
paper.
writing, so you got a scribe sitting there writing the same story every single time on the scroll. And I'm sure the variety and like depending on the scribe and how well they write it, like crap, I got a crappy volume, I can't even make up this paragraph, let me see yours real quick, that sort of thing, because I doubt, I'm sure the scribes, if it's your day every day, you're probably really good at copying down and copying consistent, but you asked me to write like a 10-page essay. By the 10th page, you're not going to be able to read my handwriting as bad as it is. But like after writing for like 2 hours, my hand's going to start cramping up. I can't do that.
I can't even imagine that.
So, do you want to go into like a bit about his life as a young Greek noble and how they explain like life in a Greek polis?
Well, I can't really say specifically on what stands out to me on his like overall life, but I did really find interesting like the educational portions about Eumenes, like those aspects. In the manga, they say that he started getting tutors at first, but out of choice, like his preference, because since his family was well off, they can like allow him or not allow him to go, to like an actual school, right? He actually stayed back at like the library at his own house and just studied there, did all his things there.
His father went ahead and purchased him his own scrolls. Kind of like a rich nerd, if you don't mind me saying.
Oh yeah, he was basically at this point like a rich nerd, and then it's kind of funny because they're like eating, right, like the family, and then his dad just grills his older brother for being a bit of an idiot. He's like, your grades are low. Do people even respect you? You bring about shame, all sorts of things.
Why can't you be like Eumenes, like your younger brother?
Yeah. And then he brings up the part where it's like, you're about that age for the physical education. And then at that point, like the manga just cuts to him in like the little like gymnasiums, right, where they're doing like their physical activities. And
so actually, an interesting point about this, like for more well off, or it could be for the whole polis. Every polis is different. There's like 300 cities in ancient Greece at the time. So it's like pick your poison. You have tiny little polis that are no more than like a couple hundred people, maybe field like maybe 50 hoplites, and then you got cities like Athens that have like could field armies of like 12,000 hoplites, like a city of like 50,000. It's ridiculous. Probably even more, like 100,000. Like every city in Greece is like its own little country with different populations and different tiny little customs. And the education system in Greece for like young nobles or like the more well off, or even the whole citizen, depending on the city, is at a boy's certain age. Not Sparta's different, by the way. I'm not referencing Sparta,
yeah.
But they would go to like a gymnasium, and in the gymnasium, the two most important things they would kind of study is like, physical prowess, and they would study poetry and oratorial skills, like how to deliver speeches, how to talk to groups of men, how to, poetry was a great way to allow you to express your voice. So, like, a lot of this, very famously, Caesar and Cicero both traveled to Greece to get oratory lessons. And Cicero complained about having to learn Greek, but he knew he had to learn it to learn just to learn to take the class in oratory, so he could use those skills and bring it back to Rome and speak Latin and use it in all his trial campaigns. It's actually quite fascinating. But the second half of that is physical education. Would you like to go into that?
Well, the way the book or the manga described it says it was kind of like a field day almost. Like that's how I would describe it. It's like a field day at school. You ever had like a field day at school where they have like an arranged set of activities that you would have the people in that class would do.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one was grappling, which obviously for Eumenes, he was like kind of a short kid. Not super like strong. He got out wrestled, poor him. And it was like there's this other guy in the manga too. He's like well built, he's bulky, strong type of guy, right? So he's like going through this. So the first one was grappling. The second one, I believe, was what was the second one? It was a disc throw, like a disc throw.
Mm-hmm.
It was like a disc throwing competition type of thing. I remember
basically learning the Olympic Games.
It's like Olympic Games, yeah.
But that's the thing. They're training their young men how to fight. Like, it's all training in a lead up to war. Am I wrong?
No, it's basically just like training regimens to up their strength, their endurance, and all that.
Yeah, because I think it's Plato's or Socrates who says it's a shame that man goes through all his life but does not learn the full capabilities of his strength through physical exercise. Like, the Greeks really like take pride in physical training and pride. I mean, it's a really the Hellenes were a really war-based society. I mean, with the amount, like, the area we're talking about, there's plenty of wars going on. Polis versus Polis. I mean, physical education from a king, nobility, or even any time during this harsh time, it takes very much precedent, because you never know. Any day now, especially like in Cardia, any day the Thracians you could just peek up over the wall and there'd be a Thracian horde of tribesmen waiting there.
The Persians too, because this is right by Persia as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's on the other side of the neck, and the neck of the Dardanelles is like no more than, I think the sea is like at least 10 miles across, and then you're in Asia Minor with the Persians. Yeah, so you want to go a little bit more? Like, because they're learning discus and like learning to do all these sports with the other young boys, and they're kind of encouraging each other, kind of like a schoolyard.
It's basically like a schoolyard, yeah. It's like PE, it's physical education.
Yep, and it's kind of funny how back then they consider that like half-year education right there. Where today you're learning social studies, geometry, algebra, like in our school regiment, and PE is just, we got to get you running at least once an hour so we could say we're trying to have America lose some weight, you know?
But yeah, so they had this disc throwing thing, and then the third thing was I think it was javelins. I believe they were throwing javelins, like a like they're saying like who had like the best form, but also like the longest distance, you know, that sort of thing. The fourth activity was running, which humanities did pretty well in that category. That's like one of the only two categories that did well with running. And then the fifth one was like a long jump, and they just measured. Well, the way they did it was, it's kind of like the sand thing, right? Like the little thing they had, like they had the thing that measured like the distance, but they made you jump with like these like barbells. Like they had like these barbells weighing you down. So yeah, he still did pretty well in that category as well.
I like it how he cleverly thought to use the barbells to like manipulate his weight, like swinging them forward to give him more momentum to jump a little bit further. It kind of speaks to him being, you know, the clever guy that Plutarch and Diodorus kind of describes him as, you know, kind of thinking outside the box a little bit, because, you know, your first time using those weights, you know, and jumping, I'm sorry, if I'm like 10 or 9 years old doing that the first time, I'm just going to hop with them and pray to God I go further than that. But like in the manga, you know, you see him swinging them as he jumps, so that way the momentum of the weight carries you forward that couple extra feet. And you know, the gym teacher's like, you caught on right away, you know?
And then this is like towards like the end. So for them, for like the younger boys, because they're still considered juniors, as they have like upperclassmen, kind of, you know, like school. That was like the end of their activities. So Humanities is with his group of friends or his compatriots, and these three older boys just come up to him and start like telling him, "Oh, let's box, let's do boxing." Because that's also an activity that was very popular in the Greek world, especially in the Olympics. You have a whole list of boxing champions in the Olympics for Greeks. It's a very well-renowned activity for them. And the thing about boxing in particular at that time was that boxing as a sport for them was just like, I don't know how to describe it, but like it had a lot of weight to it. It had a lot of weight of importance to learn, like close quarter combat. And for them, like it was very bare bones. It was almost bare knuckle at that point. It was very bare knuckle, but like they had like these little padding things. Like I think it was made out of a leather. I'm not too sure, but it was very much just bare knuckles. No weight classes. It was like no regulations in that thing. It was just straight bare knuckle.
It's like going to school. Half your education is reading classical literature, and then the other half in the gymnasium, you're basically going to the UFC fighting bare knuckle with your peers.
I mean, that's true.
Every day.
But even then, they had their own. They had another thing too. I think it was called Pankerton. I don't know the word for it, but I believe it was more like MMA. It's like where it's like ground game type of thing where they.
Krav Maga?
No, that's something completely different. No.
Okay.
No, it's like where it's like you fight on the ground. And you like mount each other, just like start like swinging on each other, like MMA, literally.
Well, basically that's kind of like where old wrestling came from. Like the origin of wrestling is often Greek, and they used it, but like back then they were still throwing punches. They would teach you how to like throw punches on the ground. Yeah. It's almost like Brazilian jiu-jitsu, because like at the end of the day, like getting in a fight today, at the end of the day, no matter what, the fight ends once it gets on the ground. Like whoever's got the advantage on the ground is going to win that fight.
Yeah, it was basically just like MMA on the ground, where they had like kicking, holds, chokes, joint locks, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so Eumenes and his group of guys, they get confronted by these three older boys. They're seniors, and the seniors are goading them into sparring basically.
And they haven't learned that yet.
They don't know anything about fighting, really. So the older guy, the very well built, athletic kid in their group, is the first one that fights this other boy, and he just gets the shit kicked out of him.
He gets decked right away.
He gets beat up. His face is all bruised. He has a bloody nose. He has welts on his face. It was bad. He got fucked up. And then obviously there is like a wait your turn type of thing. It's like they're like the older boys are having like their way with them. Not
Well, it's a way of hazing. I kind of picture it like West Point, like how the first years always get hazed by everyone else there. It's kind of a military tradition, and you even see it in school sometimes, like seniors picking on the freshmen. It's like a rite of passage sort of thing. Then these boys, they obviously, they're in the more advanced stages of training, because at the end of the day, you kind of have to train everybody. Like, hey, one of these days you might be called on to fight. You at least need to know some basics. So, and Cappadocia, where it is, I wouldn't be surprised if like Carpia. Sorry, I'm going to keep on confusing that. I apologize, everyone. But in Carpia, since it's right there on like the Thracian border, they're basically in Thracian lands. Like, they're gonna need to get their boys in shape. So I wouldn't say it's like the Spartan, like going through the Agoge training, but they're gonna, I could definitely see this being like real Cardia, training their young men in like the basics of combat, so that way everyone has a little bit of experience before they start oh no, the Thracians are here, get going, and they don't have to like train an army out of nothing.
And so obviously, like these kids, they're not as physically strong as these older kids are, as well as experienced. So they get the shit kicked out of them, right? And when it comes to Eumenes' turn to do like this little hazing, sparring type of thing, they recognize that he's the younger brother of the older brother, like because the older brother's also a senior as well, right?
Yeah, they basically say, "Oh, here's the noble kid. Let's see what you got."
Well, obviously they were hesitant at first because you can't really go beat up a rich kid, especially at that time,
Mm-hmm.
So they asked to get his brother to spar with him, and his brother at first lands a few hits, gets the best of him, but Eumenes has first let me get into this. Well, Eumenes has like this dream. He has this reoccurring dream where, it's like two dreams. One is where he's like horseback riding. That's basically what it is. And the second one is where he has this dream of this. Well, we don't know this yet, but it's like a Scythian woman who's like doing like these sword techniques, and she's like killing these like Greek men in such a fashion.
It's almost like dancing with the sword, the way she fights. She kind of moves with their moments. So just to quote Cowboy Bebop, when Spike is teaching the one kid how to fight, she's moving like water.
Yeah,
she's not trying to like outmuscle the people. She's not trying to outmuscle or hit her opponents. She's going with their moments to get around and cutting them down through their vulnerable parts. And go on.
Right. So Eumenes, obviously from seeing this reoccurring dream, he takes like almost inspiration from it, and he applies it to his little spar with his brother. And in that entire spar, he's just weaving, dodging, moving around, and he just beats his brother up. He literally beats him up, like punching him in the face, like hitting him in the side stomachs, and he just wails on him. And it's so one-sided where his brother just concedes. His brother just like, no, I give up. Stop hitting me. All that, right? And then, obviously the older kids are a bit shocked about this, even his friends, because like he has no experience in fighting. So they were expecting him just to get completely beaten up.
Yeah.
And obviously, since his brother has kind of an inferiority complex with Eumenes, he feels some type of way with it as well. He feels like he's been like slighted.
His honor has been slighted.
Right. So then there's this other boy that comes up to him. It's like bigger kid, like the guy that in the manga that fight his Eumenes' like more athletic friend. He also spars with Eumenes, and like there's like a little panel where he just sees them side by side, and it's just crazy because like the weight and the height difference is like massive. It's like this guy bigger, stronger, and Eumenes is like a much shorter kid too. So by just like looking at it, Eumenes shouldn't do well in the spar, but I'd say he arguably beats him worse than his brother. But like, first the kid like decks him and just knocks him to the ground, right? I mean, obviously, but Eumenes just gets back to him and just starts beating on him, just absolutely wailing on him, just like, and then like he just outclasses him to a point where it's like the kid is just so bloodied and bruised, where he also concedes as well, but then Eumenes kind of just like continues on the fighting, and then when it gets to the ground, he just starts beating on him even more and more and more. It's almost like he kind of taps into like this little barbaric type of like motion. It's kind of like
it's like some foreshadowing, like he has something in his past that he's drawing upon, some certain fighting style he might be for some reason familiar with, but at the same time doesn't remember.
Yeah.
Foreshadowing.
It's really interesting. Like also like the reactions of the other kids, because they have like no idea at all like where's this coming from.
Well, it's a giant upset. I mean, who doesn't like it's like a high school football team taking on like the Denver Broncos and beating them to a pulp. Like, this shouldn't be possible. Like a 9-year-old taking on like 18-year-olds.
I want to say 18. I said like they're old. I said like maybe 15, 16.
15, 16. But still, you're talking about your like average grade schooler taking on like a sophomore in high school who's been like wrestling for years. Where you just started picking up the sport. You just went to pee-wee like football, and you're taking on like your high school football team. Like, no, that I understand the upset. So how does this spark up with that when he gets home?
It's kind of funny because like, so his slave, well not his slave, kind of the family slave, comes pick him up, and they start walking back to their house, and obviously he's concerned about him. He's like, "What happened to you?" It's like, "Oh, I'm fine. We just had a little sparring session, that sort of thing." And then the slave is like, "Did you see your brother?" He's like, "Oh yeah, that was all me." He's like bragging about it. And then when he goes to see his mom just like slaps the shit out of him for hurting his brother, which again also a bit more foreshadowing. But kind of the dynamics, yeah.
Well, at the same time, I can almost see it as like, hey, you shouldn't be hitting your brother and stuff like that. But it just to mention something on the slavery, like, so slavery has existed for almost all of human history, you could argue, if I'm not wrong about that. But,
no.
But like the thing within Greek cities, like especially Capria, like, did I say it wrong again?
No, you're fine.
Okay, the thing about it is, like, especially small cities like that, only like really rich families could even afford to have slaves. And, well, at a certain point, the slave, like, almost becomes like an extension of the cardia. What the slave almost becomes like a part of the family. Like it's nothing like the South of America. Just to give a little context with that. Like yes, they were still slaves. Yes, like their lives weren't their own. But at the same time, like a family, like a portability family in a small pole is going to value, like, it's almost like an indentured servant, I would say.
Yeah.
They were treated, they weren't treated like harsh.
And I'd say at that time specifically, it's not very rarely, but it's more rare to see.
It's more the exception than the rule that, like,
slaves get beaten or anything like that, or get abused in such a, like, horrific manner.
Well, yeah, I'm not trying to justify slavery at all.
Of course I know.
I'm not trying to justify slavery at all, but I think it was like one Roman writer who said, like, who's really free, the master or the slave? Because the slave gets water, food, and, like, a purpose in life, which is to serve the master, and the master is still responsible for his slave and his servants.
Right. It was also,
like, for their entire lives and well-being. Like, because if the master failed, then the slaves are going to starve and go hungry. Now, granted, that the guy who wrote that was a guy who owned slaves and a few plantations, so, take that with the giant grain of salt that it comes with it. But, just a head up on that. So, anyways, he goes home, his mother slaps him, and then, what happens? Is this the part where he starts to learn, or
he starts talking with his father too? Yeah.
And what does his father say?
His father was like, well, obviously, what you did was you did nothing wrong. That's just how our education is. That's how it works. So you shouldn't feel too bad about beating up your brother.
I don't remember too well, but didn't his father had like a slice of pride in him?
Like he was almost happy that it happened.
Well, yeah, because, like, now you got someone who's already made a name for himself at his very first time doing something like that. I mean, the Greeks were very, very prideful people, especially in their combat and athletics, and, of course, their philosophy. So, I could definitely see the father, like, you shouldn't have beat your brother like that. Wink, wink. Good job.
Yeah, but you also kind of just, like, tell them that it's kind of the whole thing about, like, you're talented and all that, but he's like, unfortunately, your brother is older than you, so he's going to have to inherit everything, but please be there for him, be there along the way.
You have a certain talent, like, yes, your brother is going to inherit the title, but I'm entrusting you to look after him. Wink, wink. So, where does it go? Where's the volume go from this? Is this the part where we're introduced to a certain outsider who comes in?
I believe so, yes.
So, Eumenes is walking around, and he notices a peculiar person in town. And, he comes to find out that he is a slave to another family. But this particular person, his name is Thrax, which is another word for Thracian, but...
Ironically enough.
Yeah, ironically. Well, it turns out that Thrax, this slave to another noble family, he's a Scythian, a recently captured Scythian. Now, the Scythian people are very fascinating. First of all, they're a tribal steppe people, kind of north of the Black Sea, modern-day Ukraine, actually. You
say the area of Ukraine, Russia, Moldova, that's
Georgia, basically around the Black Sea, northern part of the Black Sea. And the Scythians have been around for a while. And to the Greeks, the Scythians are legendary in cavalry. They are magnificent warriors. It's a tribal coalition, so basically when I think of Scythians, the most modern peoples I could think to compare it to are like modern day Croatians or like Cossacks.
For what?
For Scythians, Cossacks, the cavalry for the Russians back in the 1800s.
Oh yeah.
Or like if you want the most notable comparison, I guess it'd be the Mongols, like Genghis Khan.
Yeah.
Like these people are nomadic horse riders, and they have been around forever. In fact, it was the Scythians who teamed up with the Medes and the Babylonians to bring down the Assyrian Empire back in 600 BC. 650, 630, something like that. So these people are a long traditional steppe people who have been there, and the Greeks constantly write about them, the ferociousness on horseback.
Yeah, they describe them as cruel, cold, merciless barbarians.
Well, I'm sure they describe all of them. But
obviously, yes, but
the Scythians have
the
Scythians have a special place to be feared by all peoples. I mean, the Assyrians feared them. Cyrus the Great of Persia, he was who knows if it's true, but it is said that he is killed by a Scythian queen after he kills one of her kids. She famously defeats him in battle and then boils Cyrus alive.
Poor Cyrus.
I know. I mean, honestly,
horrible way to go out.
Honestly, but who knows if that's really true? I doubt that because they actually built a tomb for Cyrus, so it might be just a literary invention. But still, like, the basic point you got to take away from the Scythians is they're a tribal steppe people, and they are a ferocious people, especially on horseback. So, anyways, Eumenes sees this slave, a Scythian, and he doesn't know why, but he's kind of drawn to him, and he kind of sees a sad, empty look in his eyes. And just reading the manga, you kind of see that in Eumenes' eyes too. Am I right?
No,
the same look.
You have aspects of like kind of like a melancholy, almost
like a familiar tie with him, but he can't explain.
You can't explain it. It's like,
when you see somebody on the street, but like you don't know them, but you feel a connection to them. I don't know, like. And then you realize, oh, that was like a high school friend, or like, oh, I knew that guy in high school, or something like that. Like, none of that. I'm not trying to foreshadow anything, hint, but
it's the same
he sees
vibe almost.
But anyways, as he's watching the slave does something wrong, and the master comes in and savagely beats him. Now, the reason why this slave is treated that way is because he's fresh. He's just been sold there, and Eumenes has been told that he's still pretty wild. He was just recently captured, and they're trying to like beat him into submission. Am I right?
I just started reading this. I just started pulling it back up again. Actually, they already introduced the slave even earlier than that, before the physical education part.
Oh.
So when we're seeing him again, it's when he's actually at the stable getting the horses.
Okay.
And well, the master, the guy, what was his name? His name is let's see what his name is. So honestly, I forgot his name.
It's the other noble faction. In the family. So, anyways, he sees the slave, and not to just jumping ahead right to it, he feels a connection to him. And then one particular day, Eumenes finds a dead body, and it turns out the slave is trying to escape off horseback.
Yeah, well, we get to a scene where obviously this is like after Eumenes has that whole talk with his dad, and he was born with a great gift and all that, all that fatherly son praise. There's a part where it cuts to the slave. You see him; he's free from his shackles. He's all happy, he's crying and everything, and then it just pans around, and it's just him brutally in a room full of just this entire family just massacred. They're all dead. Literally every single one of them are dead. And it's like, it's such a detailed panel too. You see where it's like the entire room is just filled with blood. You got people's heads chopped off, their limbs cut off. Just
a scene of gore.
It's just a really
with the man in the middle, covered in blood, with tears of joy in his eyes. And then you can also see
this there's also like a struggle too. There's even a body in the other room where it's like all like the pants and then like the cups and all that. It's just like, it's such a powerful like transition from Eumenes, you have a great gift, and then you see to this like slave guy where he just massacres everybody, and then it also pans over to like him holding like the dead skin of like his slave master. And then, my favorite part is like at the end he's like the dialogue, okay, time to go home. A fucking smile on his face.
Yes. So this Thrax, the Scythian slave, is trying to escape, and the local town guard, basically the militia or whoever's just on hand, is trying to go after him, and he happens to himself a sword, and he just cuts a bloody swath through the crowds, through anyone who comes up to challenge him. Now, a lot of these guys are kind of the first guys who come at him are kind of like brawlers, or who just ever happens to see him at the time. But then, the scene changes when the city guard comes after him, and he knows he's got to flee.
Yeah, he even brought out archers to try to take him down. That's how much they respected his his combat prowess.
Oh yeah, well, like, you know, half the crowd is terrified because, like, oh, a Scythian. Oh, we gotta, you know, because just all the rumors of the Scythians, but at the same time, you know, all the brawlers just can't get a hold of him. And he eventually gets on a horse. Am I correct?
Heck, he was already on a horse before that.
Okay.
When he approached the gate, he was on the horse. And then he yells out to the guards to open it, right? Like, open it, right? And they're like, fuck that, let's go get him, right? Because they had like more people than they outnumbered him, like I think like 10-1.
Yep.
And then he just comes after him and just starts mowing them down, like bit by bit, just
using that Scythian warrior prowess on the horse.
And then even like with the archers, they can't even hit him. That's how like agile he is with his movement and with his sword.
Mm-hmm.
And then at this time as well, you have Eumenes just going around the city, like he's like shopping for this girl that he knows. He's like shopping for a gift.
His little girlfriend.
And then he just stumbles upon like the marketplace where all of this is unfolding, and he sees Thrax running, and then oh my god, it's just like this scene in particular. What always gets me is like when they're chasing him, like the city guards are chasing him, right? And then he just uses people as like meat shields. Like the first guy, he pushes this poor guy into a spear, and he just gets fucking impaled. And then he takes this little girl by the neck, just holds her up, and then uses her as like a shield to block like the arrows. And this poor girl just gets hit in the face twice with arrows. And he just throws her away. It's just like, Jesus Christ, dude.
It kind of like references back, like, hey, this is a different time. Like, you're gonna use whatever you can to survive, even if it's a little girl. I mean, there's no mercy involved. Kind of the Scythian way, almost, because you're more loyal to the people who you speak the common language with, as opposed to, you know, in a city full of people who are trying to subjugate you. So I definitely see like the sympathy where he is, but at the same time, the brutality is real.
Metal, like it's just oh my god, man. Yeah. And then like the art style is like, even though the art style is like kind of like some simplistic, I'd say the way they just like bring out like gore and violence is just ugh. It gives me chills just thinking about it.
It definitely hits. It definitely hits like.
Everywhere.
All over Eumenes.
All over Eumenes. And Eumenes is like, what the fuck? And then he just walks away. I mean, like, it's kind of interesting too, because like Eumenes, like, he doesn't react like a normal kid would react to like seeing the sort of thing he's seeing. He didn't even cry the entire scene where like all the blood is. He literally like afterwards just walks by like the well and just washes it off like it's nothing.
Well, you know, he could be in shock, but at the time, like back then, it was a different time and place. Like you would have been a lot more used to death. Like, you know, when you go down and order chicken at the local store for like a drachma or an Otis or something, they're gonna kill the chicken right in front of you, and they're gonna probably pluck it for you too. Like, it's a different time and place. Like, I gotta say, like, the past is a different country, so, you know, but still, I mean, that's a little extreme if you ask me.
just back to back to back, just 3 human shields. It's just a wild sequence. And then so Eumenes, he basically goes outside the city limit, like the city walls. There's like a blood trail that he follows to get outside, and well, by the time he gets outside, he sees Thrax, and he's all cut up and bruised. But the main thing that stands out to him is that he's holding his intestines out. He basically is just like dying.
He's cut open.
He's like cut open, right? Like they gave us a cesarean section almost, and they kind of have this moment where they just look at each other. They don't really say anything, but they just look at each other with like, it's just like an empathetic thing. Well, it's also interesting too. Like Thrax, he had this thing where every time he interacted with humanity, he's like. His final words to him is basically like he's like I don't know, like a pride thing, or like an acknowledgement thing, but it's really interesting to see him like do that. And then, well, Humanity comes back. He comes back to his family. They thought he was like, you know, dead because he was like right there where it all happened. But he comes back, and then this other guy that his father is like supposedly friends with. Yeah, like those other like I think he's like a senator too.
What's his name?
I don't remember his name. I'm not good with the character name, but his name is Hectaeus.
Yes.
Yeah, it's that guy. Fuck that guy, honestly. I don't even want to get into him.
Well, just not to skip ahead of the story much, Hectaeus is known because he's the future tyrant of Cardia.
Really?
Yes. So later in the story, like after Alexander's death, when Eumenes has grown up and he's been the secretary for the Achaemenids for some years, after Alexander's death, it's kind of funny. Hectaeus actually makes it into Plutarch and actually into the histories. Now, he's known as the tyrant of Cardia, which actually makes sense if you read a little further in the manga. It actually reveals that. Yeah. But I'm not going to spoil it, but just for spoilers, it's happened 2,000 years ago. Just read about it. But when Eumenes is squaring off against Cassander and Antipater, Antipater sends Hectorus over to Eumenes, and Eumenes says, no, I don't want to deal with this guy, because him and Hectorius actually have a feud. In the real history, they have a feud. Yeah. Eumenes and Hectaeus are like on opposite factions of Cardia's politics. So it's kind of a bit of foreshadowing, like what the next events that happens in the manga.
Really interesting. I actually didn't even know about that.
I know. I mean, like, his name is only mentioned for like 2 times in Plutarch, but like, and I think once more in Diodorus, but it's one of those characters like ancient authors, when they write down books, they'll mention one names, and they expect you to either know, or they'll mention a name very briefly in the beginning of the story, and then like after loads and loads of chapter, they'll just mention them in the context, and it's like, like they expect you to remember them from all those times ago.
Or they also like reference them in other books that don't even exist anymore.
Yeah, well, it's like if you're watching a movie, they're gonna make an impactful scene where you remember this character, like, oh, this guy looks shady. He's doing some shady stuff. I hope he's probably gonna come back and be the bad guy, But like, the ancient authors, if you get a mention at all, like Hectorus of Cardia, like you're just expected to know who he is and what he did. Like there's no like backstory or like author's notes or like translation notes or anything like you get with the modern books. So like honestly, when I was researching Eumenes' early life with whatever scan information I can, he was like one of 3 names that came up about the city. I'm not kidding.
Wow. So Eumenes, he meets with his family. Hectaeus is there and all that. And then, Eumenes, after that, he's tired. After all that just happened, he goes to sleep. He has the dream with the horse again, but this time it's with the words that the Scythian guy says, "It's time to go home." And after he wakes up. Like, I think it's still night. No, I think it's either night. Yeah, it's still nighttime. He wakes up. He goes out to like the yard area, and he finds his dad is dead. Like his dad is on the ground dead. You see Hectaeus and then this other guy. I think his name is Gladius or Gladius or I think it's Gladius. You just find him dead, and then you see the dead Scythian guy Thrax there as well. And then fucking Hectaeus just so casually, Eumenes, you were followed? ? And then Eumenes is like, what? Like he's still like shocked. Is his dad? His dad is dead. And Hectaeus is just so like nonchalant about it. And then they have this whole like funeral, right, where it's just like the entire family, as well as like even the slaves are there just to mourn his dad. And then it cuts to a part where they go to trial to discuss what happens. And then Eumenes is defending himself. Well, I think you should know better how like trials work in ancient Greece, right? Because you could probably explain it better than I do.
So trials, well, I'm gonna take it based off like the Roman thing or Roman trials, but like So it's not really evidence based. It's I would say it's more. They didn't really have forensics at the time. They didn't have any of that, but it's more of the more credible witness or the most noble witness is the word to be believed.
But also, like, who has the better argument as well as...
Yes, it's a lot of argumentation.
And it has, like, the more, like, presence even in the courtroom.
Well, you know, if you study Cicero at all, most of the time, like, he was actually a lawyer in ancient Rome. But most of the time, instead of actually defending his opponent, he would just shit talk the prosecution. Like, why are you guys going to vote him guilty when this guy, this adulterer, is proclaiming him of these crimes? How can you believe an adulterer like that? Just shit talking the prosecution. Like, it's so funny. It's more of a when you're at a trial, you're basically trying to convince a random mob of your innocence. Of your innocence or your guiltiness. And honestly, like, depending on the crime, it really says, like, how good of a lawyer you need or orator.
Or even then, though, like, you have certain situations where, like, the person who's being accused of or the accuser, they will just pay off either like the audience or like the guy conducting the trial. They'll just pay them off and you just automatically lose at that
It's
point.
basically a popularity contest to see if you're innocent, whether you committed a crime or not. And so Eumenes goes to trial against
Hectaeus and Galatis. When it's not even where it's like a mob thing, they're surrounded by the city council as well, like the senators of the city.
Mm-hmm.
And Eumenes is actually defending himself very well. He's very articulate with his presentation. And I'd say for the most part, he was winning that trial. But like Hectaeus is still persisting. Oh, this happened. Oh, it's Thrax followed you home, and then Eumenes is like, no, it's impossible because I saw him. He was already dying. He had his guts coming out. He couldn't walk. How is it possible? And then the argument that Hectaeus used was that the Scythians are proud, tough, group of people. And as you saw in the marketplace, this Scythian in particular was cutting down our guys. Are you saying it's impossible for this guy who just cut down at least 30 or 20 of our own men? Are you saying it's impossible for him to just walk up and kill another man? That was basically like his argument, Hectaeus, for Eumenes. And, Eumenes is still persisting, and then, dude, Hectaeus drops a bombshell on the entire court date. He says that, he basically just outright says, you're adopted. He literally just told me you're adopted to Eumenes.
You're adopted. And
you're Scythian.
Your heritage is Scythian, so why would we ever believe you?
And then with that, he goes on, you're not even a citizen of this city, you're a slave. And at that point, it's just like...
His whole social status is just...
It changes from that
worn down. I would argue, though, in an ancient context, like, even if other people, like the elder gentlemen, like Octavius and some of the counselors knew, still, I would say he was adopted, but since his father's dead... And if his mother's not going to claim him, you're screwed. But, that right there just basically seals Eumenes' fate.
Yeah.
Because of this dick Octavius.
I mean, it's obvious he wanted control over the city, but as well as the head of.
Well, I'm sure the author is leading up to the point where. I'm sure his plan in a future date is to eventually put Octavius in the tyrant position that he historically claims. Because, just from what I read, like, he was, he was the mortal enemy. As exhorted by Plutarch, he was the arch mortal enemy of Eumenes. He was a Greek tyrant of Cardia, so I think this is like, foreshadowing build up to what he becomes.
Does it say specifically why they're actually having issues in particular, like in real life?
So Plutarch or Diodorus don't say, because to be quite frank, Cardia is kind of like a really small town.
Oh, yeah.
There's a really small polis in Greece. I mean, your major ones are like Athens, Greece,
Right.
Athens, Sparta, Thebes, maybe Lycia in Thessaly, Argos, Corinth. But, like, those are the major happening cities. And, you only get scant details because, again, like, some polis are really small. And, you don't got, like, orators or people who write down the histories live in them, and basically the only thing we got is what's written down. So we don't really know why Eumenes and Octavius are together, or why they're such rivals, but it kind of goes back to the real history of it at that point. This is the whole Eumenes being half Scythian or full Scythian is the author's choice to kind of paint in the Scythians, but like, the real history of it is, who knows? Like, Eumenes could have just been on the opposite faction of the politics in the polis at the time, and Octavius was just, his rival. But it's kind of interesting how, the author kind of creates a whole literary device where he's inventing, like, hey, this is why they hate each other. Octavius accuses him of being a Scythian slave, or the son of a Scythian slave. Let's get rid of him. And as far as the story in the manga, I think that's a good place to leave off. So.
Yeah.
But yeah,
tune in next time for a breakdown of Volume 3 as well.
Yeah, I still think it's pretty cool with the booksaws and with the scrolls stores and
I love just like the mentions of the Anabasis, Herodotus, and all that.
Yeah, there's a lot of Easter eggs to like what Greece was really like, kind of mixed in with the story, and it kind of reminds me, the best way I could describe it is kind of like the Three Kingdoms, where it's like 3/5 history and 2/5 like fantastic myth. So it's a really good manga. I highly recommend it. So maybe next time we'll get to Volume 3 and see how, what happens to poor old Eumenes.
Oh man, it's not even the worst of it yet. With that off, we're just going to sign off.
Yep.